I'm going to take a second of your time to announce that we at Clean Techies have a new look. If you're listening to this episode, you've likely seen it already through our Substack or your preferred audio platform. To all listeners, both new and old, yes, we are still the same overenthusiastic duo interviewing the best climate tech entrepreneurs. That has not changed. But this new look represents the next evolution of Clean Techies. We don't have enough time right now to break down all the cool things we have coming up, so we will be putting out our first ever monthly show at the end of July. Curious to hear about it and want to follow along? Subscribe and follow wherever you listen. Now, back to the regularly scheduled awesomeness. Welcome back to Clean Techies, the #1 podcast for climate tech entrepreneurs. I'm Somil.
And I'm Silas. Each week, we publish the secrets to success from investors, founders, operators, and experts in climate tech around the world. Building a startup is hard. Building a climate tech startup is even harder. But we make it a little bit easier.
We put a lot of effort into these shows, so we hope you enjoy. Don't forget to subscribe, leave us a review, and let us know who you think we should have on next.
With that, let's get into today's episode.
Today, we're tackling a tough issue in climate change, the built environment. One of the biggest challenges in the built environment is something called embedded carbon. Simply put, embedded carbon is the carbon that's trapped in our buildings due to the materials and processes that we use to make them. So think concrete, and if you want to go even deeper, cement and other materials like that. This makes it hard to reduce the emissions because we can't just retrofit or replace parts in this building. We have to build an entirely new building in a net zero way. But there's hope with a material called timber or wood. Timber is a promising material for making buildings because they are more eco-friendly while still being strong enough to be used in construction. However, sourcing timber is tricky and expensive because it's so limited in terms of where in the world you can find enough timber to make a good supply chain. But all is not lost. This is where our guest Eric Law comes in. Eric is the co-founder and CEO of Urban Machine, and they tackle this timber sourcing problem by taking waste wood that would normally be thrown away and turning it into reclaimed lumber using these really cool robotic arms. Like seriously, we'll link it in the description. I highly recommend you go look at a video of it. This means we can turn tree waste into useful building materials and make supply chains more local, more efficient, and cheaper along the way. We are so thrilled to have Eric on to talk to us about how he does it. This is an amazing episode. I highly recommend you listen all the way through. And before I let you go, as a reminder, you can tell how much work we're putting in, especially with this new rebrand. It would mean the world to us if you subscribed on Substack and left a comment and review on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you listen. Anyway, as always, thanks so much for listening and enjoy the episode. You know that feeling when you meet someone who shares your vision for the future? It just clicks. Like two peas in a pod. Well, that's exactly how we felt when we met Goodwin, who we are proud to have as our sponsor.
Being the first major law firm to set up a climate-specific startup and venture practice makes them exactly the kind of partner we are excited to work with. They realize that there are a plethora of challenges to building climate tech startups, and that's why they have built an entire suite of resources for founders, investors, and entrepreneurs in the space. They even offer several tailored pricing methods. And guess what? It doesn't matter where you are listening to this. Goodwin is a global law firm that you can trust to be your partner through it all. From incorporation to exit, they've got you covered.
Go to goodwinlaw.com and tell them Clean Techie sent you to get exclusive access to startup resources. All right, back to the show. All right, Eric, welcome to the show. How are you?
Doing great. Thank you for having me on here, Samuel.
Thank you for being on. For anyone who's tuning in via audio, Eric's background is a bunch of wood. And so very much foreshadowing what we're going to talk about. Eric, don't leave the audience in response. Please, who are you?
Yeah, so I'm Eric Law. I'm co-founder and CEO of Urban Machine. Urban Machine is about a 2.5-year-old robotics company, and we are building robots for reclaiming lumber from construction and demolition waste.
A very, very easy problem to tackle, right? Very
super easy.
Simple.
That's why nobody's solved it before, right?
It's why we've had like 10 lumbar company, on this podcast, right?
Yep, exactly.
Yeah.
Literally, we are building robots to pull nails. We are automating the crowbar essentially at its most basic step.
Yeah, and it's like a full robotic arm. It's doing the whole thing.
Yep,
Yeah.
we've got arms, we've got cookers, we've got cutters. It's about a 4-step process to get the metal fasteners out. Computer vision, AI, every piece of tech you can imagine
Yeah.
into about a
Yeah.
150-foot long machine.
Yeah. So at the high level, if I understand this correct, I watched a video of how you guys do it. You take the, basically piece of wood that you want to recycle. They have these like giant metal screws that are still inside of the wood that you need to remove, and then you use a robotic arm to pull it out. Is that right?
Yeah, so there's actually 2 steps we do before. So we've got the videos at the end effectors where we extract it, but for things like screws, long nails, we do kind of what we call a normalization process. And we actually cut off all the extra metal, so you end up with just a little short nub sticking out of the wood, and then we cook it. We heat it up until it's bright red, chars the wood that's holding those threads into place, and then we can extract a screw just like a nail. Just pull it straight out.
Climate tech founders are taking on a huge challenge. Not only do they need to know how to build a startup, but they also need to deal with hardware, have a strong handle on climate policy, know how to fundraise from diverse investor types. It's a lot.
That's why we make Clean Techies, the #1 podcast for climate tech entrepreneurs. In addition to our jobs, we devote 20 hours a week to producing this podcast for you. This way you can learn from the people who have walked the path before you, learn from their mistakes, and gain insights on navigating this complex journey. If this mission resonates with you, we are asking for your help. It takes a lot of effort and it's not free.
If you are already a subscriber and want to help, start supporting us today by going to Substack and clicking Upgrade to Paid. Thanks for helping all the climate tech entrepreneurs like you.
Is that like, this might be a dumb question, but is it safe to be around the process when it happens? Is there any sort of fumes in that situation?
It's just like a campfire. So we're charring
Okay.
wood, right? It's just like a campfire or any standard building structure fire. A little bit of fumes coming off of the fasteners, depending on what they're coated with, but we exhaust that out.
Yeah, that's so
So
cool.
we scrub it and exhaust it.
Yeah. How did you find this problem? Like, did you go from like, hey, I've exited the SaaS company. Let me walk around some construction sites because I'm bored. Like, what led you there?
Yeah, no. So after selling the SaaS company, spent a couple of years with the company that acquired it, running their construction products portfolio, and then left there and went to a large general contractor where I built an innovation program, and we focused on solving the craft shortage problem in the field. And the approach we took is, you need labor to build buildings, right? We have a physical product, and robotics are the only tool in the tool chest to physically put material in place aside from humans. And so we worked with a lot of robotic startups on how to build buildings in the field, how to prefab material in factories, bring those prefab sections to the field, and reduce the amount of labor required because we just don't have enough people going into construction. And people want more housing and more buildings and stuff like that. And while I was there, I got involved with a sustainability initiative where we were looking at the waste streams. Our job sites were generating just tremendous amounts of waste. Think about shrink wrap and lumber and concrete and steel was all coming off these job sites. And when we started digging into where it's going, that's where I learned that the wood was getting incinerated or buried in landfills. Nobody's recycling lumber coming off of job sites. And so it's like, okay, we recycle concrete, we recycle steel. Why not lumber? Those are the 3 predominant structural materials. And it was the fasteners. Just the labor involved to get the fasteners out was too difficult, and you couldn't do anything with that lumber. You couldn't mill it, plane it. You couldn't feed it back in the lumber process with all these fasteners sticking out of it. And so anytime I come up on a process where it's highly repetitive, it's dull, it's dangerous, takes a lot of labor, all right, that's a solution that robots are doing really well at. They love to repeat the process over and over again.
Yeah. No, that's amazing. And I feel like we kind of jumped a couple of steps ahead because it's hard not to talk about how cool the tech is. So you were sort of in the space looking at. It doesn't sound like you were necessarily looking at it from a sustainability point of view, sort of an innovation point of view, looking at the waste streams of construction. And you saw these fasteners. So fasteners like this metal in the wood, essentially, from previous construction projects, likely, right?
Yep. It was
Okay.
what holding the building together, temp structures, concrete formwork. They all use nails, screws, staples are the 3 predominant fasteners we run across.
Yeah.
And we were looking at it from a cost perspective and a sustainability perspective, right? What is all this waste? How do we reuse it?
Yeah. And why, I'm going to use your wording here. Why do you cook the screws?
Yeah, so if you ever try and pull a screw out of a piece of wood with a pry bar, 1, it's incredibly hard. And 2, if it does come out, it tends to shear. where you leave the threaded part in the wood, right? Screws are phenomenal with holding force and the ability to hold multiple pieces of wood together. And so by cooking it, we're charring the wood and essentially breaking down those fiber bonds that hold the fastener in place. And then it slips out just like a nail. And so to remove a screw takes hundreds of pounds of pull force if you're pulling straight out. After we cook it, 10 to 20 pounds of pull force.
Wow. So it's more or less just making it. Is it looser? Like how would you think about it?
Yeah, I mean, if we overcook them, they fall out. We can
Okay.
cook it so long where you can try the wood, where you shake the wood and the fastener will fall out.
Oh wow.
But we found about 4 to 5 seconds of cook time is perfect. Give it a light tug and out it comes.
Okay. So now you have this ability to cook the screws, build this robotic arm, and take it out. We joked about this. You got to tell me how in the world do you get a robotic arm from like this idea in your head to a robotic arm in front of you?
Yeah, so a lot of testing in the lab. And before that, I hired or partnered up with some really great folks. So my co-founders, Andrew Gillies and Alex Steele, I pitched them on the idea. Andrew and I had done some research on other robotics projects before. Andrew's background is ag robotics and industrial robotics. So super sharp guy. And I said, hey, I got this problem. Could we automate it with robots? And he's like, oh, absolutely. He's like, we could totally do this. And so within about a month or so, he built the first prototype where he was using a webcam to pull nails out of a piece of 2x4. And that's how we ended up closing the first round of fundraising as we took down the road, showed it off to some investors, and they're like, oh, we'll invest in these guys. And Andrew knew Alex before. He's like, oh, I know this really sharp computer vision AI guy that we got to bring on the team. And so that's how the three of us got together and formed Urban Machine back in October of 21.
Nice. You got the eyes, the brawn, and the wood guy. Essentially,
Yeah,
where do you put yourself in that puzzle?
I'm the construction. I'm the
Okay.
one that's out trying to sell this thing and get the
Yeah,
customers on
yeah.
board and fundraising. They take care of the hardware and the software and the AI and make the magic work.
Yeah, yeah. How do you, I'm curious, like, so you've built this team together. Someone, one of them clearly has previous robotic experience, and then there's the vision component, which is, so help me understand this. Is this under looking at the nails in the wood? Like, are you trying to identify nails in the wood? Like, how much of a vision technology are you doing?
Yeah, so the computer vision is set up to identify the location of the fasteners, the type of the fasteners, and then we use that for the cooking process and for the extraction process because you want to understand the orientation of the fastener in order to extract it. And so we do all that with computer vision. So we've trained our own models. And keep in mind, over the last 100 years, a lot of different fasteners have been used, right? Everything from tiny little nails for lap or lath and plaster siding to big nails for concrete formwork, screws, all different shapes and sizes of screws. And so the key thing is, right, how do you handle essentially this unknown material, right? We have no idea. You're just feeding this machine lumber and it's got all these fasteners in it. And we got to be able to get them all out every time. And so that's what this multi-step process is for, is how do you ensure that using a combination of muscle, cutting, cooking, technology, computer vision, and extraction with this robotic end effector, it becomes metal free by the end of the line.
Okay. Okay. So there's both the, identification, you have to pull it out, and you're basically surveying the whole piece of wood just to detect these imperfections.
Yep.
Um, and so now let's say you have a completed piece of wood, you've grabbed it, removed it. How are you handling that wood to send it to essentially its next building, its next wall to
Yep.
record a podcast behind?
Yeah, once it's metal free, then it becomes a bunk of lumber, just like virgin lumber. Heads on the
Ah,
flatbed trucks, right? So before our process, we call it the prickly pear state.
yeah,
So it's full of nails and everything sticking out. So we
prickly
have to
pear.
handle it with special mechanisms, special systems. But once it comes out the other end, you can run it on a conveyor, standard rollers. You can load it up on racks, standard flatbed trucks. It's ready to roll as a 2x4, 2x6, and go back in that lumber ecosystem.
Are you fighting a perception problem? Like, do people look at your reused lumber any differently?
So anybody who knows anything about wood is our reused lumber is actually higher quality than the new stuff that you get. It's one of the
Really?
very few products because the trees that we harvested, 50 years ago, 75, 100 years, the farther back you go, they're allowed to grow longer in nature. Today, everything's coming off of farms, right? We're in second, third, fourth growth forest, depending on what you're harvesting. And so those tree farms, they typically harvest them smaller, faster trees. So they have wider grains, they're grown for speed. And so it's not as high quality as what you got 100 years ago, even 50 years ago. So we're actually bringing to market a recycled product that's higher quality than the stuff you get at your lumberyard today.
Wow. And is this like a you have to see it to believe it, or like you said, anyone who knows anything, is this like a commonly known thing?
Commonly known thing, most people know about old growth lumber.
Okay.
And so I can show you pictures of a piece of wood and you'll look at the two pieces and you'll be like, oh yeah, I can tell the difference.
Uh,
It's pretty easy to understand. And it's pretty cool. The coloring and the grain patterns and stuff of the wood.
nice. Nice. And I feel like I'm gonna take this now that we've been fully amazed. I'm gonna take the second to explain or to ask you to explain how in the world you transition into contracting in the first place, right? So honestly, I feel like we skipped past your whole background.
The
I'd
whole
love to
background.
hear what put you. Let's start with the day you were born.
Yeah.
Essentially, when you picked up your journey. I guess going into entrepreneurship and being a founder.
Yeah. So I grew up in families where the side projects was construction. My parents had day jobs in tech, and then they would remodel bathrooms and houses and build spec houses on the side. When I graduated from college, mechanical engineer, the tech world had just gone through the dot-com bomb. I was not hiring, so I ended up going into construction. I'm like, cool, here's an industry that's hiring. They'll take an engineer. And I ended up working for a large construction company as a project engineer doing water treatment plants. And that was a great experience. You work long hours, ridiculous hours for contractors, but you learn a ton. Ended up going from there back to the tech world, went to some startups, then ended up building the SaaS company and selling that one. But all of my tech has always been tied to construction. It's always been construction tech companies I've been part of, except for one. There was one that had nothing to do with construction. That was pretty cool. And then, the innovation program, again, construction and technology. Technology is just purely a tool to make the industry better. Whether it's an excavator or a robot or some computer vision software, it's just another tool in the tool belt. And now we're doing it with construction, technology, and sustainability, which is super cool. I get to do all three of them.
Yeah. So you've been building things longer than you were building software. That's the
Yes,
that's the
you got it.
the through line. So software is like the anomaly there. And you said it so casually. I built and sold a SaaS company. What was that company?
Yeah, the company was called EADoc. It was a collaborative construction management platform, and it was designed to move data across the whole supply chain. So if you think about commercial, industrial construction projects, office buildings, and water treatment plants, they can have 100 to 1,000 people involved with that project spread across hundreds of firms, your suppliers and your subcontractors and your inspectors and your owners and designers and subconsultants. There's a lot of people on these projects involved, and they all have to share and exchange information, and you have to track it all. And so it was a cloud-based platform for doing just that. It was one of the first SaaS applications to track and manage construction data across the whole ecosystem.
Wow. And so basically, he was doing the whole vertically integrated thing without. I don't know if you said it, but even the way you say it right now seems like very straightforward. So it's doing the whole vertically integrated SaaS thing
Exactly.
in
With
construction.
all these different parts and pieces of the puzzle.
Yeah. So even your SaaS company was in construction.
Yes.
Oh, there we go. Okay.
Yep.
Cool. That's super cool. So I wonder, to the degree that you can tell me, depending on how deep we can get, are you looking at this company, and also educate me on like how you might be able to collect data on the day to day. Is there anything you're learning about removing metal from waste wood, or reusable wood that you think can be used to turn into data that could be advisory? Is there anything that people are missing about like how to generate data within construction?
Yeah. So, I mean, the data that we're processing here is we've got kind of a multi step data analytics platform. So we have operational data. right? So as the wood comes in, number of fasteners, quality of the wood, characteristics of the wood, right? How do we turn that into inventory? All of that's measured and generated as it runs through our system. And then we have what we call our strategic data. It's like, okay, how do I use this data to predict inventory, right? How can I predict and solve? Because one of the big challenges with the reuse world is how do you predict your inventory and sell that inventory and get just in time? Today as a designer, I can go out there and I can say, well, I'm going to spec 2x6s for this project, and I know there's going to be 2x6s available, right? Well, in the reclaimed world, since I'm not cutting down trees and turning them into 2x6s, the 2x6s have to come through the waste stream, right? And so how many are coming in? What can I predict out? Is there seasonality to it? What's the waste load? And that's where our data gets real powerful, right? Is that predictive side of it. And that's what we're going to be growing into, right? And so it's, they call it hardware enabled analytics. We're using the hardware to measure and clean and do the operational side, but then the data coming off of that hardware workflow will set us up for, predictive.
That's so cool. And this is obviously proprietary then, right? Like
Yep,
you have it. It's yours.
it is all ours.
Nice. That's so cool. And so the predictive, just make sure I understand this right. The predictive element is you are able to, I guess, track over time patterns in your inventory and even the characteristics of the wood. I'd like to like take a step back on that too. Like on the inventory side of things, what is that telling you? Is it telling you how much wood you can expect? Or, is it telling you what types of wood? Like what's useful about that?
All of the above, right? Because our goal is to match up the waste stream that's coming in with its next best use,
Yeah.
right? So if there's a customer that says, hey, I need reclaimed 2x12s, right? How long? And they're like, hey, I need 2 truckloads of it, right? How long is it going to take us to supply 2 truckloads to that customer? And we want to be able to source that across multiple customers of ours. So just assume we're going to have this distributed model. There's going to be all these machines, thousands of machines across North America, all processing material. And so we want to be able to say, hey, customer A needs 2 truckloads of reclaimed 2x12s. That may come from 3 or 4 sub customers, right? Because 2x12s aren't as high volume as, say, a 2x4. If somebody says it's all 2x4s, yeah, we can do that all day long. Or I want old growth material. I want 100-year-old 2x12s, right? Who's got that in our network across the marketplace? Or who will potentially have that within the coming weeks, right? If we know the project is coming up and the customer says, hey, I need it delivered on this date and time, we're going to be able to predict who's got that material, who can ship that material and deliver it to that customer for that project.
That's so cool. And I'm sure that's for fulfillment for the supply chain, like that's super valuable information to provide.
Exactly.
Yeah. That's super cool. And I feel like, if you think about like the natural extension of like where your company sits, it's in sort of the construction site additive world, right? Like adding on and creating new revenue for these projects that are going on. How do you like the thing that's really curious to me is like how do you go about expanding your operations, right? So how essentially do you justify building another robotic arm and moving it across to a whole nother site?
Yeah, so they'll be more fixed, right? So we'll have all these small processing facilities spread out all around the country, and our target location is the waste facilities, right? So today all the contractors they take their pickup trucks and their trailers and their dumpsters and they all get dumped at material recovery facilities or landfills depending on the geography. But it's a central collection point, right? And they all pay a fee to dump the material there, right? So the beautiful thing is our customers all get paid for their raw material, right? So the economics start off in a great spot when you're getting paid to take your own raw material. Then they use our technology to clean it all up, and then they can sell it back in the lumber industry. So it's a really nice economic story for these guys with this waste material. Versus today, they grind it all up, and either they pay to burn it or they pay to bury it.
Mm-hmm.
And so we're turning it into a much more profitable outcome for this material on these waste facilities.
Is there a world in which it makes sense to sell directly to you, or is there something beneficial about the waste recovery facility being in the middle?
So our goal is to get them to supply it as locally as possible, right? You want to eliminate all that logistics cost, the logistics carbon. So think about every metropolitan area now has its own local urban forest, right?
Yeah,
Historically, the virgin lumber supply chain is really long, right? Pacific Northwest,
yeah,
Southeast, right? Those are your 2 sources of lumber here in North America. If I'm in, Dallas, Texas, my lumber is coming from the Pacific Northwest more than
yeah.
likely or the Southeast, right? It's going 1,000 to 2,000 miles on a train.
Ah, okay. Okay. That makes sense. And so the locality is like a huge, also probably like a unit economics unlock for you.
Huge
Um,
improvement. Yeah.
yeah. I want to go. I mean, you're obviously a seasoned in and out of construction, in and out of starting and selling companies kind of guy, but you had to at some point go to fundraisers and people who will give you money and be like, hey, I want to build this robotic arm, right? I want to build this entire supply chain, new supply chain. Um, Actually, maybe I should say an add-on to the news to the supply chain. What was that process like? Like, what was essentially taking this idea to fundraisers and communicating it? What did you learn from that?
Yeah. So at the last company, I built a huge network of investors because what we did is we worked with them and their startups as a contractor to be kind of successful. Right, you need money, you need entrepreneurs, and we're trying to attract more of that into the construction world because there just was not enough robots building buildings to solve all the different challenges. And so I got asked to speak to groups of investors, talk about challenges in construction industry. And historically, the venture capital industry had not spent a whole lot of time in construction. It was a pretty small space. There's a lot more firms getting interested in it. They've all done finance, they've all done Wall Street, they've all done HR, right? But they hadn't done a whole lot of truly field construction systems. And so through this network, I started saying, hey guys, hey, I've got this idea for this startup. And a couple of them are like, wait, the guy who's telling us about all these pains wants to go start this one and he started one before. And they're like, okay, we're interested. And so it took me about 4 months, 5 months of pitching, closed that first round, and we were off and running.
Wow. So it's like, hey, I gave this guy my money. I trust him to give me some more, kind of thing.
Exactly. And then somewhere in 5 to 10 years, we're going to get return on investment, right? Because it's hardware is hard. I mean,
Yeah.
it's really hard because with SaaS, every time you want to change the software, you just push into a new
Hmm.
release and done. You've updated it, right? There's no debt. Well, you've always got software debt, but there's
Yeah.
no hardware you have to dispose of, right? You're not rebuilding the whole thing. With hardware, you gotta build a big thing, and our systems are about $500,000 each system that we've been
Mm.
building so far. So it's costly stuff.
Yeah. And I'm sure each line of code doesn't cost you 500,000, so it's
No,
pretty different.
pretty different.
um, Yeah, I mean, how does it feel to you? Are you starting to see some like fever dream, or, like annoyance with a buzz? Like, I totally resonate with you. I worked on a venture deal in construction tech, and I think similar momentum where people are looking at, infrastructure is relatively resilient in terms of economic conditions, huge supply chain, lots of issues, lagging industry. But at the same time, I feel like everyone's saying the same things, right? So you've understood the space for a lot longer than those finance guys who just like got interested in the past 5 years. How does it feel to be in the space now compared to maybe 5 to 10 years ago?
Yeah, I mean, it's we saw a lot of interest come in, and we've seen a lot of interest take off again. With the tightening of the VC over the last year and a half, a lot of firms have bailed on hardware and gone back to their traditional comfort zone of SaaS applications or AI software apps. The challenge they're all going to have is that space is so flooded with so many SaaS apps and so much AI apps that is commoditized, right? There's nothing unique, there's nothing defensible in that world. Any two guys can go build a SaaS app, right? For somebody to come build a hardware company and come compete with us, you're talking a couple of years of R&D, patents, industry knowledge. It's quite the moat we've got behind us. And so when investors talk about defensibility, I can crush a SaaS app, right? There's no
Wow.
way you're going to catch up to me like you could if I went and wrote a pure SaaS app.
Yeah.
And so we check that box, no problem. Now, are we more expensive on the capital side? Oh, absolutely. But we've been at this for almost 3 years, and there's nobody competing with us, right?
Nice.
And so and probably because it's freaking hard, right? But
Yeah.
so for the investors that are truly into doing something new, solving a new problem, and being on that bleeding edge and going first, we're it today. We're not the next XYZ. We're going first on this one.
Yeah. And first they got to find the guy who did construction projects as a side project as a kid, right?
Exactly.
That's not a dime a dozen, that's for sure.
No.
Yeah. That's so cool. I mean, you said something that's really strong, which is, SaaS isn't defensible, and it likely won't be. Um, so I guess, like, you brought up the construction industry, and this is like really, really hard to understand, where to make the bets. You said not enough robots are being built, right? Not enough robots are building buildings. So
Mhm.
how do you look at that? You're a founder right now, so you're on the ground. Why do you think, given this lack of labor, lack of housing, and extreme demand, what I guess like what do people have wrong about that problem? Because there's not enough money going into the space right now.
Yeah, I think the big challenge is people don't understand where most of the money gets spent on construction. It's labor and materials, right? It's physical materials going into a building, right? It's one of those environments where, okay, here's an AI platform, but it's not going to deliver my product, right? It's got to be tied to a robotic arm in order to actually finish that last mile of it. And most people don't understand that. They all want to do accounting apps and estimating apps and stuff that's SaaS based, much more lower capital, um, because it does take a lot of trial and error. I know some startups in the space that are just finally turning their corners at 7 and 8 years old, where they're finally starting to scale, right? Because it takes a while. It takes a lot of trials. It takes a lot of risk from the customers to try it, a lot of iterations, but they're rocking it. They're finally doing it and screaming along. And that scares a lot of investors, right? Most investors are looking for SaaS apps to start to hockey puck at 2 years,
Yeah.
3 years max, right? And if somebody comes to you with a hardware one that says, hey, it's going to take twice as much capital, take twice as long, but guess what? You're not going to get commoditized.
That is so cool. I mean, like, I feel like this is something that will definitely be top of mind. Like, everyone talks about the commoditization of SaaS. Like, I feel like the commoditization, to use like fancy, finance Wall Street word, or tech word, I should say, foundation models is also a huge like now buzzword VC topic of anyone who's investing in AI.
Yep.
Saying the same thing, which is like, what margin can you charge when two guys in a basement can build me my next, EA doc, right? Like,
Exactly.
what's the real defensibility there? So hardware might be a way to actually have defensibility in the future.
Yep. It's way more defensible than pure software, right?
Yeah,
And especially when you mix the two, right? Because you got to have software running that hardware, right? You put those two together, and it's really defensible.
that's so cool. And you said, people don't really understand where the money is spent in construction. So you said materials and labor.
Yep.
I'm curious, like, did you ever think about more creative financing around that? Because the way I think about that is, okay, if VCs don't understand that's where the money is, can you try and get money for that elsewhere? Like, obviously that's easier said than done, but is there like anything there?
Yeah, I mean, it's not so much. I mean, there's lots of banks will loan for construction projects, right? Traditional financing will cover that, no problem. There's all kinds of different avenues there. I mean, it's just, I think in understanding the finance, it's where does the money actually get spent, right? So many people go after the back office of contractors, right? Their HR systems, their accounting systems. But when you actually take a look at where that money goes, it's materials and field labor, right? Those are the big costs, right? If you're paying, here in the San Francisco Bay Area, we have really high inflated labor costs. We were paying craft labor 75 to 150 bucks an hour, right? And you're running projects with 200 to 500 people on them. That's a big burn, right? Field labor is huge. That's way more than half a dozen project
Yeah.
engineers and PMs, right? And then some estimators back in the office. And so I think that's super important for people to understand when you're tackling construction problems today. The pain's in the field, and we don't have enough people coming into it, right? Like our problem, I'm not going to be able to hire people to pull nails all day long. Nobody wants to do that, right? Can I hire people to operate robots and supervise the system? Yeah,
Probably, yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah. That's so cool. I mean, so what I'm hearing is that, the materials and labor side, a lot of it has to do with the geography and where you are as well. Am I understanding it correctly that there's a way to model out as you increase the locality of your solution, you could potentially even increase, or I should say decrease the costs, right? Increase your unit economics, because maybe where you're sourcing the labor from might even get cheaper, right? You're starting in the most expensive place you probably could be, right? Near
Yep.
San Francisco, everything like that. Uh, is it reasonable to say that you think about that as a founder, which is, my operations will get cheaper over time just from the labor cost as well?
Absolutely. We have a pro forma we set up with our customers where you plug in your utility costs, your land costs, your labor costs, and the profit margins go up for most of our customers
Wow.
because they are in lower cost center areas to run our systems.
Yeah.
Here in California, unfortunately, we have some of the most expensive labor, energy, and land. And those are three of the biggest costs that go into most operations.
But, if you make it work in California, you could
It
do it
should work
anywhere.
anywhere.
Nice.
You got it.
Is there any part of like people talk about supply chain risk. They talk about where lumber goes, right, and all of those kinds of things. And like you said, you're either in the Northwest or the Southwest, right? Especially if you're looking at North America and the U.S. Is there any sort of supply chain risk for you integrating into that system? So, you're producing this much more effective, reusable wood, right? I'm wondering, are you fighting an uphill battle to get that into the supply chain, or are people like basically, banging down your doors for your material?
I would say it's mixed. We have people that are banging down our doors and they want more than what we're providing. And then we have some people that are like, well, what about this? What about that? Right? There's always hesitancy in anything different. There are some different building codes and standards, like the states of Oregon and Washington are like, hey, you can use you can use reclaimed lumber in buildings all day long, right? It's automatically given a number 2 grade. You don't have to regrade it. And then the rest of the country is like, well, you got to regrade it, right? And so as that changes over time, more people are going to reduce that barrier. But in the meantime, it's there. We go up to Canada and they're not allowed to use it structurally. So they're in the process of getting that pulled from the building code and updated. So you do run across some legislation and regulation that does slow you down a little bit. But in general, everybody loves it. Everybody's like, how do we get a hold of this? How do we get more of it? How do you guys get to enough volume to supply this project? So you get a little bit of chicken and egg, right? We're building
Yeah, yeah,
machines, we're testing machines, there's material out there, but it's not enough volume for the big projects.
yeah,
Oh, okay. Well, when you have enough volume, then we'll do it on the big project. Right? Okay, we'll get there.
yeah. So is that how you handle the chicken and egg? Are you essentially keeping the form warm, or how are you handling that dance?
Yeah, so we're continuously generating material. We have a broad base of customers that we're working with that can take different volumes of material. And so it's a balancing act. No joke. It is trying to keep all your customers happy, keep them supplied, keep just the right amount of material moving to each one. That's probably one of the biggest challenges we have right now.
And is there any sort of like expectation setting that you're able to do as a founder to make that easier? Like, of course, this is a major problem, but you being in this industry, some things you're doing are probably so simple to you, but for anyone looking to build the next, XYZ product reuse company, they may not exactly know how to say things as like convincingly as you do. Um, how do you convince people to wait on the line? Are they resonating with the performance of your material? Like, what are they on the line for?
Yeah, so I mean, everybody loves the story, right? Everybody's like, yeah, reusing lumber, super sustainable, great story to go with it. I can share that story. That's all good. But then you got to have honest conversations with those clients, right? You got to be good at setting expectations and setting date and delivery ranges and working with your team and making sure that everybody's on the same page as close as possible, right? And that's the most important part, right? Is saying, hey, look, we may not be there today, but we're going to get there. With this team, with this funding, with this technology, we're going to make a progress, and you keep showing that progress, right? You keep demonstrating it. You deliver more material, you add more customers, more material, and you just keep growing. You just do the crawl, walk, run process,
Yeah.
and it'll happen.
What is, and now I'm gonna, the time is flying, so I want to be mindful.
Yeah,
You
yeah.
have to go back and, build some more robots. But um, as you think now, you've built SaaS companies and sold, you've, worked in contracting. So you're familiar with a lot of diverse outcomes, right? Like, how do you succeed? What does success look like? For
Yep.
this, a lot of what people talk about the exit model in climate, right? Like, what do you exit? What do you look at? How in the world do you expect to return capital if you're an investor, right? So as a founder, how do you think about the future of what your company is, the potential to return money to your investors? How are you, and of course, this is like many years out, right? But how,
Yep.
how are you thinking about that?
Yeah, so you always got to have that exit in mind, right? Are we going to IPO? No, we're in the construction space, right? We're construction materials, we're robotics. It's no. Either we get acquired by a big company or we just become a very large, very profitable company that just grows and eventually exits the investors, right? There's a couple different ways to exit.
Yeah.
So many people get fascinated with the IPOs, but it's like, there's a lot of industries that will never go touch the public markets.
Yeah.
In fact, I was reading an article the other day that public markets are shrinking. They're way smaller today than they were 20 years ago. Companies are choosing private because who wants the overhead of quarterly this, right, with no long-term future? So our long-term is either acquisition into the space or just be a super sustainable. We got a great roadmap. A lot of technology, a lot of places we can use this tech. We can go after shipping goods. Think about all the crates, right? We can go after sheet goods. Think about all the plywood and OSB out there. So there's a long road ahead for us of more products and that we can process with our tech.
Yeah, I mean, amen. I'm convinced. You have me on the hook. I definitely get what you're saying. I mean, when you have companies like SoftBank willing to put in more money than a public market would be valued, like the market cap of a public company, it doesn't make sense, right?
Yep.
That's a genuine like investing environment we live in. Um, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I think sometimes it's hard to tell founders that, because then they start thinking, what does that mean? Am I operating in this model for 15 years? That's not normal, right? From the startup stories you hear, right? But I definitely get where you're coming from, because I feel like that has a lot of potential. I know Silas, who couldn't make it on the show, but he and I always joke that a profitable company in this day and age just breeds more profitable companies, right? Because if you have the cash flow with the pace of innovation, just having the ability to catalyze new things is just
Yep.
phenomenal, right? So it's super cool to hear that you guys are thinking about that like that.
Yep.
Eric, I don't know how the time has gone so quickly, but we're nearing the end of the show. I want to ask you sort of one last question, unless you want to interrupt me with anything you want to put out. As a founder, you're gone from software to hardware. You're in a space that is getting a lot of attention now, but people are reading wrong. And there's a lot of founders in this space who maybe don't have the experience that you do, but are equally, recognizing some of the tailwinds that you've seen. If you were to start over and build Urban Machine from day one, what are sort of the three things that you would remember to be successful?
So definitely the team, right? The first thing you got to do is you got to build that team, right? It's nobody can do this alone, especially not in the hardware space. You got to build a top-notch team. So it's we've done a great job at building our team here at Urban Machine, from the co-founders to the software engineers, hardware engineers, shop techs. It's truly a team effort. We've done a really good job here. So definitely your team. The second one is the network, right? The network, whether that's sales, prospects, partners, relationships, investors, you got to have a good network, right? You got to be good at getting out there and talking with folks, because you never know who's going to open that door, who wants to partner with you, who's going to help you close that deal. It's, get out there and build a network of folks is super critical. And then, keep checking, how are you doing on your progress, right? How are you doing on your milestones, your goals, and just keep running. But always stay grounded and, hey, here's our path, take the feedback, what's working, what's not, and how do you keep getting better at it?
Amazing. Very, very strong and easy to understand points. I appreciate that so much. Um, Eric, thank you so much for coming on. It's been a huge pleasure. I feel like I got to learn what a really, really educated approach to building a lumber company looks like. And I think everyone who's listening is going to love this. So thank you so much, man.
Yeah, thank you
It's
very
been a
much for
pleasure.
having me. This was a
Yeah.
pleasure.
Yeah. Before we close out, where can the audience find you?
Yeah, hit me up either Eric Law on LinkedIn or urbanmachine.build. Hit up our website. We got YouTube videos out there. You can see the technology in action, working away, and reach out if you're interested in reclaimed lumber on your next project.
Yeah, I was going to say if you want to buy some wood. Yeah.
Exactly.
All right. Thanks so much.
Awesome. Have a good one.